This is Linda. She has a remote team in 14 countries. Before, she would get bogged down with a ton of different apps and payment methods to manage her employees. Then, she found remoteteam.com, an all-in-one platform where you can pay your remote employees and contractors and find all the apps you need to run a successful remote company.
Welcome back. Welcome back to Running Remote Online. My name is Danny Page. Good morning to everyone on the West Coast of the United States. We might even have, hi Mom and Dad. We might even have a couple people in Hawaii joining us. Joining us from the East Coast of the US is Natalie Nagele. By the way, just to throw in Natalie, this event, our third running remote online event. We have another one coming up in November, by the way. We'll see all of you there. That announcement will be coming later today. But we really wanted to be able to give the European audience an opportunity to experience a full day, right? So we've been going now for 6 hours, believe it or not. But Natalie, this is like, you've got all the time zones that the entire world is focused on you at this moment. And we're really, really excited to hear what you have to say momentarily. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Good morning, good afternoon. I guess good evening, maybe not yet. Who knows?
Buenas tardes. Here in Spain,
Perfect.
buenas tardes. I do want to, it's important for us, Natalie, just give me a moment to thank one of our sponsors and chat about one of our sponsors. By the way, we have a relaunched Running Remote podcast. I'll be the host of that podcast. The first interview I did was with Peter Rooney, the CRO of Canadian Payroll Services. And I mean, if you're attending this conference, you probably love hiring global talent. And I have a secret for you, Natalie. I think you know the secret. For all of you, Canada is really an emerging hotbed of talent, right? Canadians are highly educated. They're synced to US time. They have that North American approach to work, but yet they're actually nice, unlike America. Too soon? Was that too soon?
Too soon, way too soon.
Free universal health care, and again, no forthcoming civil war. So I think Canadians are the ideal.
Still too soon.
Still too soon. Okay. Canadian Payroll Services makes it simple and easy to hire people in Canada. On every company I've worked with in the last 5 years, every remote company, we've always had Canadian talent. Look out for that podcast with Peter Rooney. Canadian Payroll Services opens up Canada to the world. They worry about compliance. Payroll HR, you worry about getting the best out of your new team members. Natalie Nagele, she's the CEO of Wildbit. Guys, start putting the questions in, start upvoting those questions. I'm going to leave you to it, Natalie. We'll see you in about 20 minutes, and we'll come back and do a really in-depth Q&A here.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to be here. I thought a lot about, what can I do that's valuable in a world that has just been thrust into remote work, and I'm guessing there are folks here who've been doing remote for a while or maybe just starting remote. And for me, one of the most important things that I've learned is that remote teams really need to learn and be intentional in how they communicate. So we're going to dive into really practical things that we've identified to really make remote teams successful. Quick background on us. We've been around for almost 20 years. Wildbit turns 20, October 25th. We have been remote for the entire 20 years we've been in business. So we've been doing this before there was a Zoom or a Slack. Wires were sent through Western Union. It's been a really interesting ride. I work with 30 really brilliant people that spread out all over the world. So we've got the time zone thing as well. We've built a bunch of different products. Postmark may be the one people know most, but we've launched a few new ones this year, DMARC Digest and People First Jobs. But, it's not really about products that I want to talk to you about. I want to talk about this thing that I think has really allowed us to be so successful. And so remote for us is a 20-year adventure. It's also been a very different adventure. This is a photo of an office that we actually did have. We, for about 7 years of the 20 years that we've been in business, we had a kind of hybrid solution. We started in 2000 remote, and then when a few folks moved to Philadelphia, which is where I'm based with my husband, Chris, who we run the business together, we realized that we could all work in the same room. So we rented an office and brought folks together and went through that whole transition of being from, going from fully remote to hybrid, and then realizing a lot along the way, lots of mistakes, lots of learnings. Now we're back to fully remote. So kind of that whole transition has been really, really interesting. And I think what I've learned in that process is also that we are really good at remote communication. Wildbit works 32-hour work weeks, which I'm really proud of. We've been doing 32-hour work weeks for the last 3 years, really successfully. And I attribute a lot of that success to being able to communicate and collaborate so efficiently and effectively that we don't have to work as long as other teams do. So I picked this topic because in my mind, poor communicating remote teams is basically how you break a remote team. Poor communication is how you break a remote team. And it's one of those things that is extremely easy to screw up if you're not careful. As an employer, it's my responsibility to make sure that I've set up a company that can effectively communicate, a remote team that knows how to work really well together. And as an employee, it's also every individual's job to make sure that they're successful in their remote culture and communicating with their team and being great coworkers. So I'll run through some of these tips and I'll kind of try to share them from both perspectives, as a leader, as an employee, so that we can really create more thoughtful remote companies. And we have to start with the foundation of why this is important. And remote communication starts and ends with trust. I mean, you could argue that anything, teams in general start and end with trust, but on a remote team, that communication is all about building trust. When you're new, you have to build that trust. And as you stay on the team, you have to continue to maintain that trust. Why it's different on remote teams is because, when we used to all work in offices, all of us at some point in our lives, maybe, we built trust just by virtue of seeing each other. Your boss thought you were a great employee because you came into the office and you were there from 9 to 5 and your butt was in the chair, and that meant you were present, you were active, you were participating. Whether the work was good or not, right? That's irrelevant. Obviously, we know that in a remote environment, you don't have that face-to-face. So you don't have that natural trust building by just being physically present. So we use communication as a way to build and maintain trust together, both as coworkers, so we can rely on each other, and with our relationships with our managers and our leaders. There's 2 forms of communication. I know we all know this, but it's important to specify. There's asynchronous and synchronous communication, right? The way I look at it is asynchronous is on your time as an individual, and then synchronous is this real-time communication. They are not inherently, one is not inherently better than the other, but there is a balance that you need to maintain, and it varies from team to team, but it can't be one of those things when you rely too much on one or the other, because you'll lose some of those real important benefits of remote team productivity, which hopefully doesn't surprise anybody that I believe very strongly that remote teams are inherently more productive. There are a lot of reasons companies choose a remote path. Obviously, that has been chosen for us recently, but in general, right? My opinion is that one of the biggest benefits of going remote is that inherent productivity gains that from being in an isolated environment. Because we've had the luxury of working 100% remote and then moving to hybrid, we've really learned the difference between how much you lose productivity when you are in a physical space. And I'll share a quick story. When we opened up that office, we had folks that moved from different countries to Philadelphia to work together. And they had this, even though we knew a lot about focus work and all these things, we had headphones and we had these cool pods that kept some of that visual distraction down. The folks who used to be remote, who came to Philly, had this huge culture shock of realizing they could not be nearly as productive as they used to be. And we, as we're processing through that, understanding that that isolated environment is not just about noise or visual distraction. It's about like the physical presence of others and about your ability to get up and move and do things in your own pace. So we really had like a quick realization that we needed to move out of that first office into one that had private offices to at least try to fix some of that loss in productivity. So in order to maintain remote team productivity, we have to look at work as there's 2 different types of work. We have deep work and we have shallow work. I don't know if you guys have seen Cal Newport's book, Deep Work. I'm a massive, massive fan. I send it to everybody on my team, plug it here. But, if we think about deep work, we can call it focus work. We can call it your unique ability. But deep work is what we were all hired to do. That's that thing that's not sitting in meetings. Nobody was hired to go sit in meetings all day. Nobody was hired to check email all day. That is not your deep focus work. Your deep focus work is design, engineering, thinking, writing, the thing that you were hired to do, that what made you special and got you a spot on that team. And then we have shallow work. And that is the meetings that have to happen because we have to collaborate, right? Checking email because we have to do it. But that's not the thing you were hired to do. And so as a leader, my job is to maximize deep work. That's what I brought all these brilliant people onto my team to do. And as an individual, we want to maximize our deep work because that's where we find fulfillment. We don't find fulfillment checking email all day long, at least I hope not. We find fulfillment in doing that deep, meaningful work that in a lot of companies, we don't get the space to do it. So we have to kind of think of collaborating on a remote team as processing these two things, right? Where do we maximize and how do we maximize deep work while still creating space for some of that shallow work to create fulfillment and to be the most productive? So unsurprising, my first and most practical tip is that we really want on remote teams to make almost everything asynchronous. We really, really want to do what I tell my team is we really want you all to fight for on your time. As an individual, and as leaders in an organization, we have to prioritize people's ability to do their deep, meaningful work. And on remote teams, we do that in our time. We know that people are focused and able to do deep work in different ways. As many brains as there are in the world, there are different. Some people are morning people. Some people need to get up and change the scenery. Some people need music. Some people don't, right? We have all different variants, and on a remote team, that's what makes those teams beautiful and gives them the space to be the most productive because we are in isolated environments and theoretically don't have to rely on others for getting into that deep work. So as a leader, I need to make sure that I have not created anything systemically in the company that derails somebody's opportunity for deep work. As a very practical example, when we first went to 32-hour work weeks, I really told my team that I need them to internalize how much deep work can they get in their days. Like how much focus work, are there things in their daily schedule that's really derailing them? And there was an example of a standing meeting that was happening, I think it was like 9 or 10 a.m. Eastern time, that for folks in Europe was like middle of the day for them. And what they realized was that 30-minute meeting actually cost them hour and a half of lost opportunity for deep work because they couldn't get into something earlier because they knew they had this break in their day, and then later it interrupted, lunch or whatever it was. So I tell my team all the time, as an individual, fight for your on your time, and bring that to the leadership team. And then the leadership team should be doing everything they can. Now, we can't get rid of every meeting. We still have to work together. But the more we can internalize where our time is being spent and how we can do our deep work as much as we can, the better our productivity will be. There's some easy ways we can think about that, right? As colleagues and coworkers, before we interrupt somebody's deep work, we can ask a simple question. Is this actually urgent? Before you ping somebody in Slack to ask a thing, you can stop and say, am I going to interrupt their focus time? Am I going to cost them time? Because we know that focus time takes time to get into focus and time to get out of focus. Ask if it's something that can wait. We obsess over this is it urgent thing so much, especially with Slack, because Slack is, such a distraction that we actually wrote this little bot. Like, it's free. You can grab it if you wanted to, but it's a bot that allows you to email somebody a request instead of pinging them in Slack, so that when that person comes out of deep work and chooses to check their email, which at Wildbit is we're only expected to check our email once a day, they can respond to that request. And in like the simplest sense, right? Like there's times when I'm working on a presentation like this and I need a logo. I can either ping my designer in Slack and say, hey, Matt, can I have a logo? Or I can email Matt, and Matt can get back to me in a day or two when he has time to come out of deep work. And I didn't cost him anything, any of his time, and I didn't distract him. And he was able to support me in providing the slide or the logo. So really asking, is it urgent, is a simple like kind of trick that we can really be intentional. It's the equivalent of tapping somebody on the shoulder in the office, right? We don't want to recreate that experience in a remote team. So another way that we can maximize on your time is to be really intentional with how you ask for feedback requests. One of these, in our 20-year journey, one of the things that used to be extremely frustrating is when you're collaborating remotely, a lot of times you use some kind of tool to share an idea or request for some feedback or put a project out into the universe, the team's universe, and it just dies there. Crickets, right? Nobody knows how to respond to it, or it takes forever to respond. And all these ideas, because the requests are so vague, don't actually deliver anywhere. So we've started using this really practical feedback kind of mechanism or structure to allow us to move faster and really in this and enable everybody to have this deep focus work. It's really simple. When you're asking for feedback, we got to make sure that we answer these 3 questions. Who needs to provide the feedback? We advocate a lot that remote teams work in the open, which is really important, and I agree with that as well. But that also means that when you put a feedback request out, it could be sent to 10, 12, 20 people, however big that team is that's following that project. But do you really need 20 people to respond? Probably not. There's probably a few key stakeholders in that request that you really want to hear from, both because you want to hear quickly, but also because do you really want to hear feedback from a bunch of people that maybe aren't as tuned into the project. So we're always really specifying who on the team needs to respond to this, even though everybody can see the request. And then what are you asking for? In a very simple example, let's say we're sharing a design mock-up for a new redesign of something. Are you asking for feedback on the copy? Are you asking for feedback on the overall design, on the flow, on the layout? What do you want? Because you don't want us to make your request so vague that everybody's providing feedback on things you're not interested in changing at this moment. And you don't want to create so much overhead for your coworkers who are also working on their work that they don't really know how much time they have to dedicate to responding to this request. And finally, which seems really simple but extremely important, is if you don't want your feedback request to go somewhere and then just stay there stale for a long time, is make sure you tell people when you need to hear back. You don't need to be a jerk and say, I need it in 12 hours. But giving people, 2, 3, 4 days allows you to put an end to when the feedback needs to come in so people know and you can move faster. But it also enables folks to your colleagues to have that work on their time. Now, if I'm going and I know that I need to provide some feedback for somebody on their design for this specific thing, and I need to do it in 2 days, when I'm planning my days of deep work and shallow work, I can then schedule, okay, I need to carve out 30 minutes in my day to respond to my colleague and not have to sit there and feel really stressed and overwhelmed that my time is being taken from me. So we can maximize asynchronous time, but that also means we have to use real time very intelligently and very strategically. Synchronous communication is important. And while we want to use asynchronous as much as possible, there are reasons that to use real time communication to move much faster. So, for us, that means Zoom, to use video chats, we have a Zoom integration in Slack. Sometimes Slack conversations too can be useful for that. I have strong opinions about Slack. We don't have to talk about that too much today. But, my theory is if something's running too long, if a conversation or discussion is running too long, let's move it to real time. Because what we're doing with Zoom conversations or real-time meetings, things like that, is we're actually optimizing for focus work. In that example of sharing that design mock-up, if there's a discussion there and it's going on and it's valuable, but maybe there's some conflicting opinions or things like that, that 2-day turnaround time can turn into a 3 or 4-day turnaround time. And now you're stuck and you're not getting your work done. The better way is to start to sense, okay, there's some disconnect here. We're not all on the same page. Let's get a 20-minute conversation going in Zoom. Let's hash out our ideas, come up with a solution, make a decision, right? Every meeting should come up with a decision. And then it enables us all go back to focus work. That 5-minute, 10-minute, 20-minute, whatever it needs to be Zoom call is actually really productive in allowing your team to move faster and to work more in their deep focus work. Tactically, we should all be doing our video calls separately. Now, I know right now we're all doing everything separately, and I understand that, but in general, we want to make sure that if you are in the same room together, to respect your colleagues, you're not sitting side by side and staring at a screen and one person on the screen. Everybody should always be doing their calls separately. It's respectful, and it's also better to hear. And we want to document any discussions that are had. We want to work in the open as remote teams as much as legally and proper, right? And we want to make sure that decisions are not being presented without context. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is if there was a meeting, just record it and post the conversation. You enable people to follow up with things on their time, right? When they're doing a certain work, they can plan out their days and they feel connected. Folks who care will watch, folks who don't, it's okay. But you've created that transparency and you've allowed the team to stay connected and be really remote first. But I would be remiss if I didn't put this up there. Apparently, we have to now also mention that, believe it or not, being on a remote team does not mean you sit in Zoom all day. I have lots of friends in traditional corporate environments who are like, I'm just so tired of sitting in Zoom. We're going to break remote work if we're just asking people to move from an office to their home and just sit on a Zoom meeting all day. That is not what remote team is about. So when I say get on a synchronous conversation on Zoom or whatever, it's got to be succinct, it's got to be to the point, and it's got to come up with some kind of solution or some kind of decision has to be made. Let's move through these quickly and get people back to focus work. Third, really important, if once we've decided what's synchronous and what's asynchronous and how to manage all of that, we need to now be clear on where communication happens. I know remote teams love to embrace productivity tools. I imagine there are people listening right now who are building the most amazing productivity tool for remote teams. I can't wait to see it. I know we're all testing things all the time, but I want to just remind us that it's not the tools that are the problem. It's always behavior behind the way we use tools that are the problem. On our team, we use at least 6 different means of communication. The tools don't actually matter. What matters is being extremely distinct on what goes where. And there's 2 types of communication tool, 2 types of communications that happen, right? We have permanent and we have temporary. Identifying which is which and what goes where is how you allow your team to move fast, how you allow them to know where things are, what they want to focus, how to find things, how to be staying in sync. So I'm going to share the next slide with our tools, but please don't use them as a recommendation slide. It is just what we use. We don't even love everything we use, but I want to just bring some points across.